this very position in 68, 69 CE or AD that the Roman army came here to Gamla to conquer the fortified city, which they hoped was impregnable. They crossed over here, facing the wall of the city. Gamla was not fortified on the steep sides, but because this was the easy access point, this was the fortified wall. The Romans made 2 attempts to take the city, which had terraced houses down the steep side of the slope that you see there. And as they took themselves onto the roofs of the houses, they collapsed, and the Roman soldiers fell in with a considerable loss of life of both the people, the children, babies, etc., in the houses, and the Romans who fell on top of them. So they withdrew and reconsidered. Now, one night, shortly afterwards, a few soldiers gathered at the round tower that you see on the corner of the wall there, and dug into the earth, and spent all night scraping away the soil so that a number of the key stones came away, and the tower collapsed, killing the soldiers on top of the tower. That was then the signal for the rest of the army to try and breach the walls. And they breached the walls in 2 places. You can see the 2 roads going up in a V shape towards the wall. So the wall was breached at the round tower and at the upper slope there with one of the roads, and at the lower slope. And so they entered the city. Now the people and defenders gradually were pushed back up the hill, so that by the time they reached the pinnacle of the hump, which is considered the camel's hump, and Hebrew for camel is gamal, so it's Gamla for the camel's hump. When they reached the pinnacle, they had nowhere to go but to fall into the precipice on the far side, which is what happened. The Roman army then withdrew, and the site remained for nearly 2,000 years just as it was left. Now, the most prominent building that we see between the 2 entrance roads there, which went to the gates of the city, there's a 1st century synagogue. There were 2 different reincarnations of the synagogue. It presumably had been a 2-story building in the first building, because there were some stair treads reused in secondary use by the time this synagogue that's there now was built. It was built around the turn of the era's early 1st century CE, in the Jesus period. Now, technically this mountain, although it overlooks the Sea of Galilee in the far distance over there, and on a good day you can see the Sea of Galilee, it's not technically in Galilee, in the province of Galilee. So when the New Testament says that Jesus preached throughout Galilee, we can't be certain that this synagogue, although it existed and was probably known to the people down there on the lake, we can't be certain that Jesus actually preached here. But it's a very interesting example of 1st century synagogues, and it establishes the fact that synagogues were not just meeting places like house churches. They were large, substantial buildings with a specific purpose of gathering together. There's a mikvah just outside, suggesting that people observed ritual immersion. But there are 3 other mikvahot that have been uncovered so far in this town, and 2 of them are in a factory that made olive oil. This meant that the workmen, before they started work in the morning, would immerse to make themselves as pure as possible before they made their olive oil or wine, which could have been made here, probably was made here as well, and that was their chief exports, and they exported that up into the borders of Lebanon, to the north and to the east as far as Damascus, because there was a major trading caravan route not far from here that they would have utilised to sell their produce. So we can establish that they were observant Jews, that they tried to produce kosher products, and that they worshipped in a synagogue. Now, the synagogue would have seated between 450 and 600 people, but that would not have been nearly enough for the total population here, which would have been over 2,000 people. But they, of course, like as in churches that have big congregations, they have multiple services, so the same thing probably happened. The synagogue is called Galilee style, which means that the people sat in a circular type of fashion, rectangular type of fashion, but facing inwards and facing each other in a communal sort of way, a bit like theatre in the round that became popular in theatre in the 1960s, I remember. And it's a very good example of Galilean type synagogue, and it's very large. It's not quite as large as the Basalt synagogue down at Capernaum, which was also a first century building, but it's almost that size, so a second size in dimension. And it shows in the first century, in the Jesus period, that there were synagogues and that they were congregations, that they were specific buildings, especially for meeting. Does not mean that they didn't use the synagogue for public meetings or some other purpose, but the presence of a mikvah suggests that, and it's right outside the front door, it's not halfway down the block, it suggests that ritual, cultic type behaviours, really of what we'd call nowadays a religious nature, happened here at Gamla in the first century and in the Jesus period, which is the first third of the first century CE.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed that video, please press the like button. Also, if you want to be kept up to date with all of our new content, please press the subscribe button. If you find this content interesting and you'd like to find out more, let me encourage you to come over to our website, which is synagogueandchurch.com, and over there you'll be able to find lots of information, and you'll also be able to find some of our books that are for sale there. In those books is loads and loads of more information on these and many other topics. Thanks for watching.